talked about how neoliberalism, I'm just back from vacation, folks, so I haven't learned to talk again yet. I talked about how neoliberalism creates a perfect pathway for fascism. Well, today we're going to look more closely at the history of neoliberalism within the Democratic Party and how it has, at least in part, laid the groundwork for the rise of right-wing extremism, personified most vividly by the Make America Great Again movement, and of course, the ascension of Donald J. Trump. Now, you may be wondering, how did a set of economic policies originated within the Democratic Party help fuel a movement that is seemingly antithetical to its values? Well, the connections are more profound than they first appear. And to understand them, we need to start by defining neoliberalism and tracing its origins within the modern Democratic Party, particularly under President Bill Clinton, before moving into the consequences that we face today. As a reminder, neoliberalism is an economic and political ideology that advocates primarily for free market capitalism, deregulation, privatization, and a reduction in government spending on social programs. At its core, neoliberalism assumes that markets are the most efficient allocators of resources, and as such, they should operate with minimal interference from the state. This ideology first began to take hold in the late 1970s and early 1980s during the Reagan and Thatcher eras, as a response to what was perceived as a failure of post-war Keynesian economic policies. While initially championed by conservatives, neoliberalism soon found a home within the Democratic Party as well, as I mentioned earlier, particularly during the presidency of Bill Clinton. In the 1990s, President Bill Clinton rebranded the Democratic Party as a third-way political force, a centrist alternative to both the left-wing policies of the old Democratic Party and the hard-right conservatism of the Reagan and Bush eras. In reality, this third way was a repackaging of neoliberal principles dressed up in progressive language. One of the hallmarks of Clinton's presidency was his embrace of deregulation and free trade, policies that were previously the domain exclusively of Republicans. For example, under Clinton, the Glass-Steagall Act, a key piece of Depression-era banking regulation, was repealed, allowing commercial banks, investment banks, and insurance companies to merge. This deregulatory move laid the groundwork for the 2008 financial crisis, which decimated the middle class and exacerbated economic inequality. Clinton also pushed for the North American Free Trade Agreement, which led to the offshoring of millions of American jobs. Between 1993 and 2013, the Economic Policy Institute estimated that NAFTA has displaced roughly 850,000 U.S. jobs, especially in the manufacturing-heavy states like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, states that would later become key battlegrounds in the 2016 election, and also, I might add, for the election that we're facing in November. During his presidency, Clinton also enacted welfare reform, signing the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act into law back in 1996. This law replaced the welfare system with a block grant program, which imposed work requirements and limited lifetime benefits. The result was the shrinking of the social safety net at a time when more and more Americans were falling into poverty. In short, the Clinton era solidified the Democratic Party's embrace of neoliberalism, favoring corporate interest, deregulation, and dismantling of social welfare programs, all of which contributed to rising economic inequality, economic instability, and the gutting of the middle class. It's important to note that the neoliberal project did not end with Clinton. President Barack Obama, while often portrayed as a progressive, continued many of the neoliberal policies of his predecessors. His administration's response to the 2008 financial crisis, for example, prioritized bailing out the banks rather than providing direct relief to homeowners facing foreclosure. According to the Center for Responsible Lending, as many as 10 million Americans lost their homes during that crisis. Obama also expanded free trade agreements, including pushing for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, also known as TPP, which was criticized, of course, for potentially offshoring even more American jobs. While his administration did implement some reforms, such as the Affordable Care Act, these measures often worked within the framework of neoliberalism rather than challenging it. The Affordable Care Act, for example, was a market-based solution to healthcare that left private insurance companies intact rather than moving us toward a single-payer system. By the early 21st century, the impact of neoliberal policies became starkly evident. According to a 2020 report by the Economic Policy Institute, the top 1% of U.S. earners have seen their income grow by 160% since 1979, while the bottom 90% of earners have seen their income grow by just 26%. The Federal Reserve also reported that, as of 2019, the top 1% of Americans controlled more wealth than the bottom 50% combined. This level of inequality is not just a byproduct of a natural economic process. It is a direct result of policies that favor capital over labor, deregulation over protection, and privatization over public investment. Neoliberalism erodes the economic stability of working and middle-class people, leading to insecurity, fear, and a profound sense of betrayal. When people lose jobs, see their wages stagnate, and struggle to afford health care, education, and housing, they look for someone to blame. In this environment, right-wing populism thrives. And this is where the link between neoliberalism and right-wing extremism becomes clear. Neoliberalism not only creates economic hardship, but it also fosters a political culture of individualism, competition, and the weakening of collective institutions like unions. As community bonds fray and economic inequality rises, people begin to search for scapegoats, be they immigrants, racial minorities, or even the government itself, rather than looking at the root cause, an economic system that prioritizes profit over people. Now enter Donald Trump. Trump capitalized on the anxieties produced by neoliberalism, particularly in regions that had been devastated by trade deals like NAFTA. He promised to bring back jobs, drain the swamp of political corruption, and put America first by rejecting globalist policies. His message resonated with voters who felt abandoned by both parties, but particularly by the Democrats, who had once been the champions of labor and the working class. But Trump didn't just ride a wave of economic discontent. He also tapped into the cultural and racial anxieties that neoliberalism exacerbates. While neoliberal policies dismantle social safety nets and erode communities, people often turn to authoritarian figures who promise to restore order and protect them from perceived threats. This is why, historically, periods of economic instability and inequality often give rise to fascism and far-right extremism. In the 1930s, for example, the Great Depression helped fuel the rise of fascist movements across Europe. In the US today, we see similar dynamics at play, as economic precarity pushes people toward the demagoguery of figures like Donald Trump. So where does this leave us today? Neoliberalism has created a society where the rich are richer than ever, the poor and middle class are increasingly precarious, and collective institutions like unions and public services are weakened. This is fertile ground for the rise of authoritarianism and fascism. A 2019 study from Princeton University found that economic inequality and political polarization are closely linked, and that as inequality increases, so does the appeal of authoritarian leaders who promise to, quote, restore order. This dynamic is playing out not just in the United States, but around the world, where neoliberalism has led to the rise of far-right movements in countries like Brazil, Hungary, and India. In the United States, the economic and cultural devastation wrought by neoliberalism has fueled the rise of MAGA and other right-wing extremist groups. The fears and anxieties produced by economic insecurity are easily manipulated by demagogues who promise to restore greatness by turning back the clock, by scapegoating immigrants, Muslims, or the deep state. Ultimately, neoliberalism and the far right feed off each other. Neoliberalism creates the conditions, as we talked about, economic inequality, social atomization, and political disillusionment, that make far-right extremism appealing. And once in power, far-right movements often double down on neoliberal policies, creating a vicious cycle of inequality and authoritarianism. To break this cycle, we need to fundamentally challenge neoliberalism and the false promise of free market capitalism. We must demand a return to policies that prioritize people over profits, that invest in public goods and social welfare, and that build strong, resilient communities. Only by addressing the root causes of economic inequality and insecurity can we hope to stem the rise of right-wing extremism and build a more just and equitable society. In the end, the rise of Donald Trump and MAGA is not an aberration. It's a symptom of a deeper sickness within our political and economic system. And until we confront that reality, we will continue to see the rise of dangerous authoritarian movements that threaten the very fabric of our democracy. And that, my friends, is the final word up front. Today's guest is here to elaborate upon the perplexing popularity of Donald Trump and his rise to power. Dr. Douglas Giles is the author of the book, Why Trump? Why Some People Support Him, How the Rest of Us Can Respond. And he will be joining us right after the break. Welcome back to Coup Save America. I'm your host, Sean Sainhart, and today we are having a conversation with Dr. Douglas Giles, a philosopher by trade and temperament. Dr. Giles earned his PhD in social philosophy at the University of Essex and is now an assistant professor at Elmhurst University, where he researches the root causes of bigotry and injustice and their role in political action. Dr. Giles hopes to build a better world by bringing philosophy out of its insular ivory tower and into everyday life. He has written extensively on the history and nature of ideas, ideologies, and paradigms. He is the author of 3 fascinating books: How We Are and How We Got Here, A Practical History of Western Philosophy; Left Wing, Right Wing, People and Power, The Core Dynamics of Political Action; and of course, the book that we will be discussing today, Why Trump? Why Some People Support Him, and How the Rest of Us Can Respond. Dr. Giles, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
So I read your book. I read it over the weekend, and very fascinating, I must say. I also listened to the audiobook while I was reading, so I could take notes. Fantastic job on the audiobook as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I guess the core question here is, given the right-wing authoritarianism that has been persistent, not just in the United States, but around the world, why Donald Trump in particular? Because he does seem like a very odd choice. You mentioned in your book that Donald Trump is probably the first atheist president that we've had in this country, and yet he's embraced by the far-right Christian movement, evangelicals. It doesn't seem to match. So what's the deal? What's going on here?
I believe very firmly that it's important to understand that Trump is far more a symptom than a cause.
Yes.
And that he is a figurehead. And very literally, I looked up the etymology of the word figurehead recently, and it is a word for usually a maiden in the front of a boat back in the days of the great old sailing ships. And Trump is just that figurehead, that naked lady, if you will, that's in front of a large boat that has been sailing in the United States for a long time. And you are correct that there's some aspects of Trump that are very odd. And do side by I do side by my statement. I stand by my statement that yeah, I think he is an atheist president. There's zero reason to believe that he has any convictions or beliefs or faith, and certainly not anything even remotely Christian by any remote
Right.
definition of what Christianity means. But are multiple reasons why people do support Trump, and especially why the particular people who do support him. And I try to lay out in an extended argument. We have this element, this element, and this element, and they combine in this con man who somehow has figured out how to say the right things at the right time in the right way to be able to fill this gap that a movement had been looking for several decades. And for a variety of reasons, we're stuck with Trump because the United States created Trump.
Oh, absolutely.
And a lot of that has to do with the things that you mentioned in your monologue before I came on. And neoliberalism is one way, one dimension of it. And it's not a label that I use myself because I think that's only part of what's going on here. But when you talk about how the certain segment of the population, it's usually called the disaffected white working class, excuse me, and how they are manipulated by certain forces, neoliberal forces, in order to stir up their anger and their fear, which comes from some real places. But I employ a concept in philosophy that is very little known in the United States, but is known more in Europe. It's from the French word ressentiment. And the idea of ressentiment comes from two philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche, who most people have heard of, and Max Scheler, who almost nobody has heard of in the United States. And Scheler is the really good definition of ressentiment as the feelings of hatred and despising of certain groups of other people that have their root in feelings of impotence. And why we have this MAGA movement today, and why we have the predecessors of that movement, because MAGA is nothing new, really, is because you have powers that be that use their political power to distill the existing ressentiment of people who are feeling impotent and want someone to blame. And yes, neoliberalism and its big propaganda machine provide that. Trump is a useful figurehead because he understands that language. Because, and I'm not a psychologist, but a lot of people have talked about this, Trump has issues. And Trump really does feel this ressentiment. There's a feeling in Trump, it's obvious that he's insecure,
Oh,
especially
absolutely.
around women, especially around people who aren't like him. And so he's the perfect poster child for this because he can speak that language and it doesn't have to make sense, which is what slays so many of us today. It doesn't have to make any sense. That's not what people are looking for. They're not looking for rationality. They're not even looking for discussion of issues. They're looking for someone who they can say, this guy hates the same people I hate. And that's really what it's about.
He is definitely a con man in every sense of the word. But his cons are seemingly so damn obvious, at least to those of us paying attention. Do his followers is it just a matter of this hate and anger and resentment is so strong that they just don't care? Or do they see something that we don't?
I don't think they see something that we don't. I think that he knows how to play to the myth of American exceptionalism. That's the thread I will go with for now. And the idea of American exceptionalism, which is deeply rooted in Calvinism, the pseudo-religious ideology of right-wing Calvinism, that America is and always has been this shining city on the hill, this nation that was ordained by God, who is this being who says, these are the chosen people and these are the non-chosen people. And Americans are the chosen people. And God has brought the white Protestants to this wilderness so that they could conquer this wilderness and create this nation that is this utopian Christian nation. And that myth of American exceptionalism is something that has been very strong in US culture. Obviously, not everyone believes it. Obviously, not everyone benefits from it. The reality, though, is that there are enough people who believe in that myth, especially more in the past than today, that there is this force in politics within the United States that takes a very particular character because of the paradoxical history of America, which we can get into later. And they see in this notion of this shining city on the hill, this blessed America, that fits in with the ressentiment of anyone who is perceived as not fitting into this vision of this utopian society. And what Trump does is weirdly personify this sense of both American exceptionalism. You hear from so many MAGA people the idea that, well, one reason why I believe in Trump is that he's so rich he can't be bought. Now, that's absurd in the face of it, obviously, because all he needs is just Putin to say nice words about him and he'll bend over backwards. Of course, Trump can be bought. But it's that vision again. It's about what do people want to believe. And people on the left are just as guilty of that. That's human nature. We are biased creatures. We want confirmation of our preconceptions of things. But for Trump, this notion that I am this superior being because, well, my wealth is a sign of my moral superiority, which is a Calvinist idea that fits perfectly in with the myth of American exceptionalism and American capitalism, neoliberalism, and the ressentiment there that Trump has that no other figure on the right has been able to really capture. The closest really would be Father Coughlin, who was a radio guy in the 1930s and 40s. And he was very much into the ressentiment about the evil immigrants and the evil non-Christians who are a threat to the fabric of American society. But he didn't seem to really live it the way Trump does, because Trump is the ultimate victim. He is a professional victim. And that victimology and that victimhood that he pins everything in his life on, of constantly needing to reaffirm this part of himself, is something that appeals to these people who that's what they see. And so it's not about economics, it's not about policies, it's about this ressentiment and this need that people feel to return to this myth of how we never really were, of American exceptionalism.
Yeah, because there's also an ironic strain to that. I mean, MAGA, Make America Great Again. The implication there is that America is not great.
That's right. And that is so crucial to understanding why people support Trump, why Trump is successful. Because when you have people who believe America is not great, but should be. Now, leftist people too,
Right.
which I would say I am one. I'm pretty progressive, I would say. I want the world to be better. I want America to be better. I want Europe to be better. I want every country in the world to be better and every society. But I want it to be better in the sense of creating more positive norms, more positive possibilities for the world and for people in it, to increase the circulation of power among people. And to my mind, that's what being leftist means, increasing the circulation of power. For Trump and people believing America is not great, the sense there is that America is not great because too many people who shouldn't have power have power. And so the movement there is a movement that is fueled by ressentiment, fueled by the bigotry that comes from those feelings of impotence and distaste and disdain. And they need to roll back the clock. And what we really need to ask the MAGA people is like, okay, so you think America is not great. We need to make America great again. So rolling back the clock to when? Before civil rights? Before feminism? Before FDR and the New Deal and the Great Society? Or before segregation? Before slavery? I mean, seriously, these are not gotcha questions. These are not absurd questions. They really need to answer what it is that they're really looking for here. And we get a clue. We get a very big clue, primarily from the Trump rhetoric against immigration. And I talk a lot about this in the Why Trump book because I think it is crucial to so much of this. America has this paradoxical history. It is a nation of immigrants.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Yeah. And yet it is, and this is what we don't talk about. Everyone says, oh yeah, we're a nation of immigrants. Absolutely, we're a nation of immigrants. What people don't talk about, but really need to talk about, is that it's a nation of immigrants that each generation of immigrants tried to slam the door on the next wave of immigrants, the next generation. And that goes back to the very beginning of American history. The Sedition Acts of 1795,
right?
The first real act of Congress went against the First Amendment of the Constitution to say, no, the government has the right to restrict the speech and freedom and freedom of movement of anyone that we deem to be undesirable. And that has been in the fabric of American society ever since. And we can see each generation of immigration that comes to the United States, opposed by those who are here, trying to slam the door on those people that are coming in. And of course, Trump latches onto this rhetoric because it is the rhetoric of ressentiment. It is the rhetoric of American exceptionalism. And this paradox that America is this shining city on the hill, the greatest country in the world, this God-created, God-blessed and ordained nation is so desirable, so wonderful that everyone in the world should want to come to the United States. But if they do, then it corrupts. And I'll use the phrase that Trump employed here, even though he didn't invent it, it corrupts the blood of the United States. Because that's what it's really all about for these people.
So is immigration really the main source of this resistance? I'm not even going to try to say the French word.
You can say resentment. That's okay.
Resentment, okay. Is immigration right now, is that kind of fueling the resentment that's building, or is there more to it? Because there seems to be a lot of racial components to it as well, outside of immigration.
Yes, immigration, I think, is just more of a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a figurehead in and of itself. It's the it's for the public consumption. It's a bit of a target. It goes much deeper than that, because why be against immigration? Well, in the larger sense, certainly, it's true of every culture in the world that there is a fear of difference. Human beings have a basic fear of difference, and they don't really know exactly what to do with people who are drastically different from them. And being in Europe, you see that as well. That there's a lot of fear and loathing about the possibility of immigrants. In the United States, part of what's going on there, though, is a much deeper sense of resistance to difference, that race very much a part of it. The unique history of the United States, where we were the largest institutional slavery society, where the enslavement of people was seen as not just legal, but sanctioned by the state and a virtue. And Calvinism really adopted this as a virtuous sign of America's exceptionalism and its religiosity. But it goes beyond race too, because as I say later in the book, and I think this is really important because we all know the words woke.
Right.
And we know that woke is this or that. No one ever defines what woke is. DeSantis didn't, Trump doesn't, all these people that talk about it don't. But what they really mean are people who are different and people who are aware that, oh, hey, our culture, our society doesn't allow power to be circulated to people that are considered undesirable. There are classes of people on various lines. There are all kinds of divisions within society. There are economic divisions, racial divisions, gender divisions, gender preference divisions. And wokeness is just realizing this. And woke is a fairly new term. Its roots lie in Black American society, and that's true. But it's been misappropriated by the radical right wing and white supremacy because they're wanting to turn the tide in this, in the sense of the right wing as ressentiment and victimization. We're the victims here. They assail wokeness as a new term for liberalism in general, and real liberalism, leftism, progressivism, right. The whole agenda of, no, we think rights belong to everybody. Women too, gays too, all these poor people, working people, people should have rights because they're people, because they're citizens of the United States. So what used to be, you go back to Gingrich, and it was the evil liberals, the damn liberals. And now it's the damn woke people. So it's not just about immigrants, getting back to your question. Immigration is an easy target, and you can put the onus on that. We're against immigrants. But as we saw today, I'm sure you saw this story too that's kind of broke. J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
Can't help but roll my eyes at that. Vance propagated this meme on the right of Haitian immigrants. Haitian immigrants are stealing and eating your pets in Ohio. And obviously, well, who are Haitians? Haitians are Black people, and not just any Black people, but Black people who were the first nation in the world to have a successful slave rebellion and take over the country from the colonial enslavement powers. And Haiti has been this boogeyman ever since for imperialist people around the world. And so this meme of it's Haitian immigrants, it does double duty for the people who are in the MAGA movement with their ressentiment, because it's anti-immigrant. So that's the real thing, but it's Black immigrants. Because it wasn't just immigrants, it was Haitian immigrants. And when you really understand that this is ressentiment, this is motivated by these feelings of reaction against, how dare these people be given power? How dare these people be given right? Because what I identify as reactionism, which is a word that is sorely underused to describe the far right, it's reactionism. They're reacting against the changes in society, the increasing diversity of society. What these memes do, what anti-wokeness is it's reacting to, I am the victim, that those people who I think should not have power are being given power. And reactionism is that dread fear that somewhere, somehow, someone you think is your inferior is being treated as your equal. Immigration is the perfect firebrand for this whole panoply of ressentiment and victimization, because the immigrants coming to this country and all the myths about it, that somehow there are welcome wagon parties at the border saying, come on in, we'll give you free food, we'll give you a job, we'll give you a home, we'll give you all these things. But these people who believe this, because it fits in with that fear and that anger that they have.
It's not helping the fact that we actually have a border crisis going on right now as well. Would that be a fair statement? I mean,
well, we have, I wouldn't even call it a border crisis. I think that there is worldwide
yes,
a crisis of refugee need. And yeah, I'm here in Europe. I'm in Czech Republic right now. And we're very aware that there are immigration issues in European borders, the EU Schengen area borders. And there are many different dimensions to this, or there are dimensions to this that are very different from the American scene. But what unites them is this awareness of there are very good reasons why people want to leave where they're at and try to find sanctuary in a country that's not suffering from war, not suffering from climate catastrophe yet, and that may have a hope for a better life. Because despite the vile rhetoric of people like Trump and Vance and Project 2025, etc., these aren't all criminals. They aren't all vicious people. They aren't all nasty people. The vast majority of these people that are just looking, that they're just normal people, families looking for places to not get shot, to not starve. And talk about a very basic human idea. I would like to not die today.
Yeah.
And yet they're demonized. And so the idea that we have a border crisis, I don't buy that simply because I think that there are more people who need help. It's not our responsibility to help them. I grant that. But this idea that is being created by the right wing to distill those feelings of ressentiment, that fear of the immigrant, that these are just all horrible people, they're rapists, they're murderers, they're drug dealers, is there to just blow the idea so out of proportion that it's just absurd. There aren't people pouring across the borders. There are people appearing at the borders. Obama sent so many people back, deported so many people, that if he was a Republican, the Democrats would be going, "Oh my God, you're a monster," to these people. And yes, Trump did very similar policies to Obama, and Biden has done very similar policies to Trump. And this idea that there's these open borders, and Kamala Harris is the czar of the, like, bring the welcome mat. That's all she did was just say, "Come on, tear down the wall, bring out the welcome mat. We're just going to let all these thieves and murderers in." That's absurd. The numbers of people being sent back are enormous. And yeah, some people get through, but the people who get through is mostly, and this is true in Europe too, the real problem is the drug trade. And that's not immigration. It's drug trafficking and the human trafficking that goes hand in glove with drug trafficking. You solve the drug problem, you have a real response to drugs, not the war on drugs. Then you'll start dealing with the real issues here, but it's not the families that are just looking to survive.
Right.
And so I don't think there's a border crisis. I think that's manufactured. I think there's a drug crisis. There's a drug trafficking crisis. There's a human trafficking crisis. And there are problems with immigration reform. But I wouldn't say there's a border crisis.
Okay. That's fair. We do have an influx of immigrants coming into the country. And there is a sense that we're not responding to this well at all. And I would say that that's probably feeding into a lot of this. But we go back to resentment. I mean, has this always existed in America? Maybe we should start with Calvinism.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe defining that,
Sure.
because I mean that's really the root. If I'm following along,
It's one of the major pillars of what's going on here. Yes, John Calvin was a political figure in the 1500s, and he was alive and active around the same time that Martin Luther was. And Martin Luther, of course, was the founder of the Protestant movement of Lutheranism. And Protestantism in general was simply the breaking from the hierarchy of religious rule of the Roman Pope. And there were various versions of it, and Luther was one of the larger ones. Calvin's particular version was rooted in various ideas, but in a nutshell, what we have with Calvinism are the ideas that God is absolute supremely powerful in the universe, except that for some reason God has allowed Satan to be the ruler of the earth. And there are some biblical quotations that you can use to support this idea, and Calvin did, and people still do today. What we have then in this worldview is a world that is in a cosmic war between good and evil, light and dark, God and Satan. And that this war will dominate the earth until the end time. And that's when God comes and slays all the evil people, and Jesus is put on the throne of the New Jerusalem, or whatever version of that you want. But until the end times, we are slaves to Satan. And Satan uses many tricks to try to make our lives terrible. But because Calvin believes so strongly that God is omnipotent and omniscient, even the idea that humans have free will could not be accepted. Because the idea that a human being could say no to God or choose to do something separate from what God's will is for that person would contradict with the idea of the absolute omnipotence of God. So Calvin said, and based very loosely, I don't want to get into too much of a theological lesson here, but I do want our viewers, listeners to understand the idea of the fall in the Garden of Eden, the original sin of Adam and Eve are cast out of paradise, means that in Calvin's idea, humans are totally depraved. Now, the idea of original sin goes back to Augustine in the 400s, but Calvin believed that this was so central to the theology of Christianity that everything comes from that idea of human beings are totally depraved, not just sinful, totally depraved, incapable of being good. And Calvinism is still practiced today. There are a lot of denominations that are Calvinist, and there is an official organization of Calvinism. I forget the name off the top of my head. But the first points of the 5 major points of Calvinism today, active in the United States, is that idea of human total depravity. People are so dominated by sin, they are incapable of doing good unless God specifically intervenes. And again, because it can't even be said that a human being can choose to follow God or choose to not follow God, Calvin had to say that humans are chosen by God as to who is saved and who is not, the elect and the damned. And again, there's some interesting biblical verses that can be used to support this. Jesus at one point says, God will separate the sheep from the goats. The sheep are the good and the goats are the bad. And the sheep then, the elect, are preordained to receive salvation from God. And the damned, of course, are not. And a big problem that Calvin had to solve with this is to say, okay, if we're going to set up this theocratic government, which he did in Geneva, Switzerland, that we're going to create this society here where only my version of the rule of divine law works in a secular sense. We need to figure out, well, who are the good people, who are the bad people? Well, we can't know the mind of God because we're sinful creatures. But Calvin's ingenious solution is to say, well, God in God's omnipotence gives good fruits to the good people, the elect, and denies good fruits to the people who aren't the elect. Okay, that makes sense. Well, what are these fruits? Wealth, prosperity, good health, and wealth. So how do we know then that that person is good and that person is elect and that person is not elect? Well, that's the rich person and that's the impoverished person. And it's not like this is the first time any human being has ever come up with that idea. But what Calvinism did is he incorporated that into the core of how Christianity works and say that this should be how secular society works. Before Calvinism, there was at least the general sense of the king or the prince is the secular state and the church is the divine state. And they're dependent on each other, they interact with each other, and there's a lot of crossover, but they're separate institutions. Calvin said, no, that should not be. The state should be run by the religious figures. And that is something that comes into the American consciousness. And that's simply because when you look back at the very early immigration patterns in the United States, the Puritans, as we know them, the Pilgrims, the whole Mayflower and First Thanksgiving and all those people, they were Calvinists. They were Calvinists who came to the United States because their Calvinist religious ideas really freaked out most of Europe, who understandably, the kings and princes of Europe said, okay, that's revolutionary, that's a danger to our concentration of power. So the Calvinists, not all of them, but a lot of them came to the United States. And this Calvinism, with this sense of a secular state that is a polity of the elect who have a right, a divine right, to be prosperous and to rule, and over those people who aren't, and to be able to say it is our obligation, not just to serve God, but an obligation for us to shun and remove people who are sinful. This is such a part of the American mindset. It does exist in Europe to an extent. It's not like there are no Calvinists in Europe.
Right.
But Europe has much more of the Catholic and Lutheran conception of we're all in this together. We are all children of God. And obviously, I'm not saying that this is a perfect sentiment by any means. But European society, that the American right wing derives as the socialist nations, these horrible socialist nations where you have real welfare and you have nationalized health care and all the basic things that a human society should have, evil socialism. Just a quick story on that, I think is worth telling. My wife last November broke her arm. And so she had to get the arm reset and go back for checkups and do physical therapy. Didn't have to pay a thing for it. Not a question. Because you're injured, you get care. That's it. You're a taxpayer, you get care. Yeah. And that idea is somehow so horrible, so evil. And it's because of Calvinism. It's because the sense, again, of people who do not deserve should not get. And the elect and the damned. And that idea of we are fighting this. And Calvinists demand that the good people, the elect, condemn sin, condemn sinners, remove them. And that's why we have these bizarro notions of a war. And the war on woke, the war on terror, the war on drugs. It's all about war. And we see so many groups, churches that talk about needing to be Christian warriors, the United States being the strong protector of virtue. You had on your show not too long ago Russell somebody who is a former U.S. Marshal, or Air Marshal.
Oh, right.
And he was talking about, one of the first questions that you asked him in that show was something to do with the right-wing domination of law enforcement. And I forget his last name now, I just remember Russell, said that there's a certain home within law enforcement for people with a right-wing mindset. I'm probably paraphrasing him poorly there. And I think that's very true, because this notion of many people within the right wing that it's not just we should live a goodly life, we need to make sure that everyone else lives a good life. And that's very Calvinist, and it's become a part of the American civil religion, because our civil society is a reflection of these basic ideas of how the world should be. And a lot of people are talking today about the issue of Christian nationalism.
Right.
And there's a lot of truth to that, but one of the arguments that I make in the book, that I won't go into at length here, is that Christianity is really just a marketing, I shouldn't say marketing, but it's really just a front for the American nationalism, the real idea of America as this exceptional nation. And of course, to say that is to even question this is, oh, you hate America. No, I don't hate America. I think America could be better. I think America's got a lot of problems it needs to deal with, especially its history.
Oh,
and of course, we're not allowed to talk about its history. And that's part of the agenda here, is we're not allowed to talk about slavery. We're not allowed to talk about racism. We're not allowed to talk about segregation. And as a university professor, I'm very vividly aware of how the right wing is pressuring my profession to just be silent. Evil things like feminism exists. Slavery existed. Gays, they're people too. Like, well, this is not difficult stuff. And yet, the textbook that I wrote, you mentioned how we are and how we got here. Ron DeSantis would ban that in Florida if he could. I don't think anyone's bought it in Florida, I'm pretty sure, but it's because it talks about Black philosophy, feminist philosophy, socialism. Yeah, Marx had some dumb ideas. Marx has some good ideas. But let's talk about it. We're not allowed to talk about it. And that's the real thing that what the right wing is trying to do, is prevent us from even having the conversations, because having the conversations corrupts the purity of the doctrines of nationalism, American exceptionalism, Calvinism, and capitalism.
Yeah.
Throw that in there too.
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm going on too long.
No. I'm finding this fascinating. So please continue. What I just can't comprehend, and maybe I'm wrong in my perception, but it seems as though we went from electing Barack Obama to all of a sudden this mega movement that seemed to emerge out of nowhere. And we look at the election today, and it's a tie, effectively. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think that these Calvinist thinkers have suddenly just emerged en masse. And so maybe my perception is, as you said earlier, that this has always existed. There's nothing new here. But it feels new, I guess is my point.
I think it feels new to us because, of course, we are within our generation of time. And there was, I guess, a hope that after the 60s, we pretended to solve the civil rights issue. We
Right.
pretended to solve the feminist issue. And so we've dealt with racism, we've dealt with sexism, and even gay rights. It is like, okay, we're going to stop imprisoning them. And I think there was a certain complacency of progress. There was progress, absolutely. But it wasn't done, and the people that were responsible for the injustices didn't go away.
Right.
So I think when you go through the history of anti-immigrant rhetoric, you see that not as the entirety of the issue, but we can see it as a sign of what's percolating underneath. And one of the things I think is worth talking about, I mentioned it in my book, that I think is important, because MAGA is, and I stress this over and over, MAGA is not new. This is just the most recent manifestation of this very, very old problem. And 1844, so that's 180 years ago, a guy named Louis Charles Levin founded a political party. He originally called it the Native American Party, apparently very deeply unaware of the irony. And then he changed it to the American Party. But then it came to be known as the Know Nothing Party, which is, again, very ironic. But Levin invented the term nativist for the idea that America should be a nation only for natives. Again, completely forgetting the fact that he is an immigrant and a child of immigrants, and not the natives of the United States, or what became the United States. And he started talking about immigrant conspiracies to take over the United States. His idea was mostly that it was Catholics, German Catholics, who were coming over and were going to try to take over the government. And so they had, in the 1840s, 1850s, they had a fraternal society, like the Lions or the Elks or the Masons or all of those things. They sponsored paramilitary gangs that committed violence against immigrants and free blacks. There were instances where these gangs, these mobs, burned Catholic churches. They also ran candidates for office. They were never terribly successful, but they ran candidates even up to the presidency of the United States, local offices, state offices, and the presidency. And they kind of disintegrated by the 1860s, largely because the Civil War kind of took all the air out of the room. But that was there. And when you really look into who the American Party was, the Know Nothing Party, it's eerily similar to the rhetoric that we hear today from MAGA, Trump, and so many other people. These people would have watched Fox News, or heck, Fox News is too liberal, excuse me, like Newsmax or Blaze or whatever's out there now. The hatred of people, and then it shifted to, when the Irish potato famine happened and the Irish immigrants came over, then the hatred shifted to the Irish, and then it shifted to the Chinese, and then shifted back to the Germans when the unification of Germany under Prussia caused a huge wave of immigration to the United States. Then the Eastern Europeans came and the Italians came, and then it shifted to that. And suddenly the Irish were okay because at least they're not as weird as the Poles. And it just goes on and on. So MAGA feels new to us. And the Tea Party, really, of course, the MAGA is just the Tea Party. We almost forget about the Tea Party during Obama. But the Tea Party wasn't new. The Tea Party felt new because we thought we had maybe gone past this,
Right.
maybe, but it was still there. And I forget off the top of my head. Are you familiar with a book called The Turner Diaries? I forget what year it was, but I
don't think I've ever read it, but I'm familiar with the concept.
Right, because Timothy McVeigh,
right,
the Oklahoma City bombing, he read that book, believed that book. The Turner Diaries, and I need to write something about this. I keep keep putting it off for other things. But the Turner Diaries is a kind of Mein Kampf, if you will, for what Christian nationalism is about, and what the MAGA people, the really hardcore, far right-wing MAGA people really want. And it's a novel, if you want to call it that, but it's a fictionalized account of how good Calvinist Christian Americans are going to rise up and take over the government. And yes, it says so, slaughter all the Jews, slaughter all the gays, and just have this purge. And people need to read the Turner Diaries, or at least be aware of it. Reading it is probably too much for anyone to deal with, because what the Turner Diaries talks about mass deportations and murdering of people, that is what's in Project 2025. They don't openly say murder, but they do openly say deportation of millions of people, of arming every level of law enforcement in the United States by national decree to mobilize to remove anyone who is suspected of being in the country illegally, because the burden of proof then becomes on the individual to prove that they belong here. And that is what's scary. Not that, oh my God, Disney cast a black girl in the part. But that's what we're supposed to be afraid of. We're supposed to be afraid of immigrants. But no, it's the real thing that we should be afraid of, in my opinion, are the Project 2025, which is corporatist, it's neoliberal, and it's willing to reach in and grab the power of ressentiment, of that hatred, of that fear of a segment of the population. Now, what I don't understand, what I wish I did understand, is why these polls say, oh, Trump's in the 40s, when clearly the MAGA people are 20-25% of the population in the United States, if we're really honest about it. So what's the rest? What's this other 20%? Who are these people that think Trump is a good idea? I don't have an answer to that, except that maybe somehow they may not buy into the true core of nastiness, but they're kind of friendly to the basic idea of, yeah, you know, I don't like those black people either.
Thank you for being.
Hold on
and
for
welcome
one
to the
second.
Neil Podcast.
Let's take a technical
I'm
break.
Josh, and I know that I know nothing. So I created this podcast to help awaken my.
Stay tuned, because Citizens Talk Radio will be right back with more hope for a better world.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I forgot to push a button before the show.
We are slaves to our technology. It's okay.
Yes. Okay, so where were we?
I had just opined about it's
polls.
interesting that there are probably 20-25% of Americans who may not agree with the hardcore bigotry of MAGA, but still think Trump is a better idea than any Democratic president. And that probably is made worse by the fact that Kamala Harris is black and Indian and is a woman. And it has nothing to do with her policies. They can talk about, oh, she's so liberal. It's like she's not.
Yeah.
But, and I think it was true for Biden too. I mean, there were issues with Biden, to be sure, but there are some people that would still think that they would say, oh, I remember I do some projects for this guy. He was this businessman, business expert, efficiency expert, big shooter guy. And he said, you know, I hate Trump. He's an ass, but he lowers my taxes. So I'm voting for him. This was years ago. And that's always stuck with me because, yeah, I think there's a certain segment that believe that. It's like, oh, well, if I get mine, who cares how many immigrants get rounded up? Who cares how many women are deprived of their bodies? And on and on and on. Because my taxes are low. And maybe some people do like the idea of, well, I don't hate the immigrants, but I'd be happier without them. I don't know. But we've created that environment and really exploited that tendency in human nature to fear other people who are different from us, and are willing and open to have the government take action. Because the right wing, for all its talk about, oh, I want a small government, I believe in a
Right.
small, limited government. No, you want a government that works for you. Because there's one thing that all human beings agree on. We want a government that works as to how what we think a government should work. And it would be nice if instead of these other issues, we talk about, okay, how can we get government to work? I have my views, you have your views, let's talk about it. And there used to be some of that. And MAGA does seem new, because one thing that did really change is not from the ground up level, but from the top down level. And I'm thinking of Newt Gingrich and the contract with America, and how Gingrich and Dick Armey and Tom DeLay changed how Washington works. And this rhetoric that you hear from Trump and MAGA today, that was created by Gingrich. Even Reagan wasn't as rhetorical, as much of a diatribe. I've lost the word I was looking for there. In terms of the rhetoric, as Gingrich was. And Gingrich said, the Democrats are corrupt. The Democrats are perverted. That they hate America. They hate Americans. They hate working class Americans. They're elitists, and on and on. And he instilled that in American culture. And so now what the rhetoric at the highest levels of government ever since 1994, with its you're ruining America, no, you're ruining America, and compromise is evil, that gives cover to the simmering ressentiment, the simmering right wing, that threat of American society has always been there. It's like, oh, so we can say this out loud now too. And I think it was a big calculation. I don't know if Gingrich really believed any of the crap that he spewed, but it worked for him, at least for a few years. And then he got voted out because he was too vile even for his own caucus. But that's certainly changed. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, they wouldn't have survived even in Gingrich's house.
Yeah.
But they do now.
So are we seeing an evolution where, because it does feel like it's getting worse?
Yes. And that's probably because certainly social media and the speed of communication makes this easier for people. I don't think it created it. Social media just makes it easier to communicate in this way and about these matters. But I think the other aspect of this is and it's something that you at least hinted at in your beginning monologue, was Bill changed the dynamic. And I think he opened the door for Gingrich, and I think Gingrich exploited the opportunity. Clinton and his people made a deliberate calculation that the Democratic Party should change from being a completely pro-union side of the worker party to, well, we'll take money from both sides.
Right.
And he opened the door to the corporations and said, well, the corporations have more money than the union, so why aren't we doing for the corporations? And that partially changed the dynamic. And so ever since, the Democratic Party has not been able to fight back in the way that it used to be. I was raised in Minnesota, and he was before my time, but of course we Minnesotans grew up with the legacy of Hubert Humphrey. And Hubert Humphrey was typical of a certain style of Democrat, not a Southern Democrat, but a Northern Democrat, that we are Americans who believe in freedom for everybody, and we believe in a strong working class that is a middle class. We believe in unions. We believe in equality. We believe that everyone should have the same opportunities in this country. And those Democrats don't really exist anymore.
Right.
We can talk about how moderate Republicans don't exist, and that's certainly true. But true left-wing Democrats, no. I'm from the state of Wellstone, Paul Wellstone, who was in that mold as well, who tragically was killed in the campaign trail when his plane went down. It still makes me sad to think about it all these years later. But Wellstone was, and I have an affinity for him because he was a university professor, like I am, and he believed that America means we stand up for everybody. America means we stand up for the working class. And Clinton didn't do that.
No.
Obama didn't do that as much as he. I was in Illinois at the time, and when Obama first came to my mind was way back in 2002, 2003, excuse me, when he was running for the U.S. Senate. And I was very peripherally involved in his campaign. I was one of the volunteers who stuffed envelopes and knocked on doors and things like that. But that Obama was progressive. I really believe he was. And Washington changed him. And I don't forgive him for that because I think that's a damn shame. And he didn't rein in the banks, and he didn't rein in the corporations, and he didn't enforce the antitrust laws. And I don't know why, but the Democrats lost the high ground. The Democrats lost the moral ground. So, of course, if the Democrats are going to run to the center, then that moves the Overton window of, oh, well, if they've gone from left to center, well, then we can stop even pretending to be center, say the center is now the new left, and the far right is the right. That's exactly what has happened from 1994 up in 92 when Clinton won the presidency to today. And this is continuing to go further and further right. The whole apparatus is moving in that direction. And so you could say it's an evolution. That's one way of phrasing it. De-evolution, degradation, those would be other words that we could use. But we don't fight issues anymore. We fight this bizarre kabuki dance of Republicans are out to ruin America. Democrats are out to ruin America. 95% of their policies are the same, but the other ones are pure evil in a Calvinist sense, and we're the pure good in the Calvinist sense, because that's the language of American civil religion, especially in the post-Gingrich era. And how do we get out of it? Well, I supported Bernie because I thought maybe he would get us out of it.
Yeah, me too.
I don't agree with everything that Bernie says, but I think that he at least understood that very basic thing of, no, if America means anything, it means everybody and not this division. And the Democrats have bought into this division too. And I think it's just a shame. And I take the Democrats and all these people that are out there producing videos. I did a little thing today that I posted on YouTube about, mocking Trump is silly, but there all of these channels, and all they do is, hey, Trump said something stupid today. Yeah, it's a day with the day at the end of his name. Of course, Trump says something stupid today. So what? That doesn't deal with issues. No one talks about issues anymore.
Yeah.
Except for, no offense, lightly watched and listened to podcasts.
No offense, Nathan.
Yeah. There are a lot of us out here, but I don't know. So I wrote the Why Trump book because for a variety of reasons, but mostly to try to just say something to, like, maybe we could just think a little bit deeper, delve a little bit deeper, and start to have some more dialogue about what's really going on. Because saying Trump is a buffoon, Trump is a fool, and Trump is evil even, that's not the picture. Trump is a symptom of a system that created Trump and allows Trump to survive. and talking about the system, talking about American history, talking about how we got here. And that's teaching philosophy has really shown me how much ideas change societies and how they evolve through time, and each era builds on an earlier era. And we are sitting in the 2020s because of where we're at, because of all the things that happened before us. And we need to look at these things, even the ugly things, perhaps especially the ugly things,
Yes.
and realize our part in that.
I was going to ask you, well, here, let me, I'm really tempted to ask you, how do we get out of this? What's the end game here? Because I'm scared to death. Maybe that's an overreaction. But it's not looking good if Trump doesn't get in. And I know you make the point in your book of not calling Trump a fascist. You actually dissuade that concept.
Yes.
But it certainly does feel like a fascist concept is coming our way.
Yes. What a Trump presidency would allow is the Project 2025 agenda, which is the real issue here. And the Project 2025 agenda is the culmination of a 50-plus year project spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation, among other groups, that would create a secular Calvinist state in an ironclad way, where power is concentrated strongly and severely into a very small segment of the American population, based on economics, based upon class, based upon race, based upon religion and gender. And that is right wing. Now, fascism, it's a minor point that we philosophers like that. I agree with a guy who said, Zatlin, that truly fascism is 1930s Europe. So we can't call anything else fascism. But is it the brother of fascism? Is it the twin of fascism? Maybe so. But what unites fascism and what we see today, both in Project 2025, in people like Putin and Orban and Bolsonaro and various others, is concentration of power. And the answer to that is to be honest about that's what it's about. It's about a group of people wanting to concentrate power in them and to convince enough people that somehow they won't be victims of that, to support them. Plato, way back 2,400 years ago in ancient Greece, said the real danger of democracy is that a person with enough charisma will convince enough people to make him the leader. And then once he's the leader, he can do away with the laws because people support him. And we've seen that time and time again throughout history. I don't think we should get rid of democracy, but what we should do is recognize that we can do politics in three ways. And that's how I close the book, in a more hopeful sense of things. That we can do politics antagonistically, where we're just fighting with each other, or we can do politics agonistically, which is, I know, a very odd term, but we philosophers use that. And there's a particular philosopher named Chantal Mouffe who says that the difference between antagonistic and agonistic forms of politics is in antagonistic politics, you say, that is my enemy, I need to destroy him or her. In agonistic policies, we say, that is my adversary, who I do not need to destroy, but I do need to defeat. And the adversary is, okay, I will debate with you, I will dialogue with you, but if I win the argument, then I win the argument and we don't replay the game. But there's a third form of politics that was developed by Amy Gutmann, and I always forget his other name here, Dennis Thompson. They call it deliberative democracy. And it's exactly what it sounds. What we do as a society is we deliberate, we talk, we communicate, and we have an open process. It's also been called by other people open democracy, where we don't just line up and take a vote on every issue, but we have an open process where people are heard, their inputs are listened to and considered, and the government will make decisions. And when the government makes decisions after deliberation, because they're representatives of the people, they've been fairly elected as representatives of the people, those decisions are law. That doesn't mean that they're not questioned. So it's not a dictatorship. It's not a concentration of power in that sense. But it is law, and it needs to be respected. And if you want to change the law, there's a process to change that law. And curiously, that's in some respects how the Constitution set up the United States. The right for petition and redress of grievances. How it's ever worked in practice is highly debatable. But the basic idea that government is responsive to the people and that people are active in their government and the whole process is open and it's fluid. It's recognizing the reality that things change and therefore laws need to change, ideas need to change, communication needs to change. And we recognize each other. That just because you're different does not make you an enemy. And that's the biggest thing that we've lost in the United States. You're no longer just a person with a different set of ideas from a different political party. You're the enemy of the state. Maybe we were all united more when we had the enemy was the Soviets. And we could maybe get along a little bit better. But it's a complicated thing, and it's not easy. It is complicated. It's work, which is why people don't want to do it. Actually get involved, actually care, do work. No. And there's a politician who tells me he hates the same people I hate, and he's going to get rid of the people that I hate. I'll vote for him. I'm done. That's human nature, and it's sad. But instead of the current state of politics in the United States, marked by all these fault lines and these justifications for why we should discriminate against those people, and those people, we need to somehow change things such that we are actually being deliberative, have systems in place that will bring more people into the process, circulate power to more people. That's what being left-wing really is. And that's socialism, isn't it? And it's so evil.
Well, that's what they'll say. They'll say it's socialism. We just did
and in a way, it is. The real meaning of socialism is a society that works for everyone in society. One of the biggest crimes that Karl Marx and his followers did to the human race, especially Lenin, was to take the word socialist and make it mean the right-wing dictatorship that was Marxist-Leninism. That's not socialism, but he called it socialism. And so everyone that knew they didn't want that said, I'm against socialism. And I still meet people here that...
Oh, yeah.
I grew up under socialism. No, you didn't. You grew up under the Soviets. And so you don't hate socialism. You hate... I know a German professor who's like really on this point of, no, that's not socialism. That's the dictatorship. That's the Sovietism. Real socialism is this, but no one wants to listen to that. And it's a shame, because just bring people in the process. That's what America is supposed to be.
Yes, but the sense of resentment that we keep going back to seems instilled from the start. And what I know is that what we have today is not sustainable.
Right.
Something has to give. And I guess my huge fear is that Trump is going to win the election. And I don't know what that means for the country. I don't know what that means for the world. But it does seem that Trump is exceptional and this ability to, granted, he is very charismatic.
Mhm.
He certainly knows how to play the victim, which again just amazes me because it seems as though it's such a facade, but yet Trump is somehow able to manifest this large movement. And I keep trying to go back to what you said earlier, that it's not anything new. It just feels new, and it feels larger than it's ever been before.
Mhm.
And I mean, the election shouldn't even be close.
No, it shouldn't be.
And yet here we are, it is. As a philosopher, do you kind of share my belief that things have to, or not have to, but things are going to get way worse before they get better?
Well, if you had asked me that 8, 9 years ago, I would have said yes. And then I thought it did. And then I thought, oh, so it really got bad. So now people will wake up. And it is a little confusing as to why more people haven't awakened to this fundamental problem. I know that so much of it, and I don't want to agree with this, but so many of my colleagues talk about this, and I think they have a point that I reluctantly concede to, is that the apparatus of the machine of propaganda is so pervasive in American society. The corporate media is, you know, something like 85% of all the media in the United States is owned by people who are libertarians in ideology. And that does affect things. I'm not a conspiracy minded person. I'm not like Noam Chomsky that sees, or Zizek who sees Nazis behind every bush. But I do think that we are so saturated in what the corporate media gives people. And the internet is such a lost opportunity because
Yes.
people have this option to read anything, look anywhere, learn anything in the world. And no, they watch cat videos. I have nothing against cats. And they watch people falling down, and they watch sports stars, and they watch pop stars, and they argue about stupid stuff. And of course, that's encouraged. And we know that because Zuckerberg says that's what he does. Google says that's what they do. There's a trial going on right now. It just started yesterday or today about Google and the antitrust,
Right.
and how they have completely dominated things. And there's a hope that maybe the system will do what its job and say, hey, this type of manipulation has got to stop. The EU is doing better at this than the United States is, because the EU has taken very strong steps to rein in Google, to rein in Facebook, and now X, Twitter. It's still Twitter.
Yeah.
Brazil has cut off Twitter. And this is what needs to happen. And that's not the panacea, but that's a help towards things. Because what we need, real conversation, not memes, not attack ads, and this constant stirring up of division and fear and hatred. But the corporate machine does that. And it's not just social media. I am not old enough, but I hear told of a time when you could watch one of the 3 network newscasts in the evening, and it was news.
Yeah.
And it was information. And it's not been that for so long. There are some journalists out there. Victor Blackwell is very good on CNN on Sundays, but of course he's on Sundays when no one's watching news programs. Amanpour, one of the few who is really good at things, and I'm sure there are others who, I apologize to them that I'm not mentioning them at the top of my head. There are real journalists out there, but they're not as big a platform as we need. No, people that said, "Hey, Trump's an idiot. Look what he said today." They get 300,000 views. Real journalists get 10,000.
Yeah.
I get 10. They get 10,000. But and it's conversation. It's needing to change to, we're going to talk about issues. We're going to talk about things. We're going to talk about personal stories. And we're not going to just have the apparatus tell us what we should listen to, what we should think. And that's a very difficult battle to fight. And it's an uphill struggle that a lot of people just aren't willing to engage in. And I can't blame them in a way. But the other thing that's a part of it that I haven't gotten to yet is the reason why the corporate force feeding of culture works is that a lot of people prefer that. They don't want to have to think. They don't want to have to care. They would rather watch something silly and stupid, listen to something that doesn't challenge them. And I know as a writer, that's a huge struggle to, well, I'm a philosopher. I want to write about serious stuff. Oh, people don't want serious stuff. No. Here's 10 ways that you can improve your work life. Here's 13 ways that you can make money working from home. Here's the latest gossip about Taylor Swift's boyfriend. And this the debate of, well, who's causing what? Is the corporate media? They'll say, "Oh, we're giving this to people because that's what people want." And do people want it because they don't realize that there are alternatives because none are provided to them? And how do you solve that? That's such an entrenched issue within society that you can't just wave a wand and go, "Oh, here we are with long form, serious content now." And there are people out there that want that. There are people out there that consume that. I will give a plug. There's a platform called Medium, medium.com, which I and many other people write on, that is one of the only platforms out there that I'm aware of where you can get an audience writing about serious things. There's a lot of crap on there too, to be sure. A lot of listicles and sensationalism, and but you can find that there, and you can't go to CNN or NBC or MSN and find that stuff. No, it's all the crap. And I wish someone would contact me and say, "Oh, I heard you say that about Medium. Here's another place that does that." I'm like, please tell me, because I want to give my money to those places. And it's got to be that everyone needs to do what they can to converse, to listen, converse, and above everything, recognize other people. Not be afraid of other people, not be afraid of difference, but recognize you may be different, but that's okay. Let's share our differences. And I know that especially from music, because music, my prejudice will show here, I hate pop music. I hate the derivative, formulaic pop music. My wife and I went to a restaurant for lunch. It's like, who listens to this stuff? Because they're piping it in over our sushi. Like, you want to listen to this stuff, do you? No, we don't. But it's like, I'm into the weird stuff. Give me the weird stuff that no one's ever heard of. That's what's interesting, because I learned something, I experienced something, I grow as a person because it's weird. And not in the sense that Vance is weird. It's the good weird. I like the good weird. But no, the corporate media says, no, they only want pop music. We're only delivering pop music to them. Radio stations, yes. Radio stations used to have DJs that could play their own music. Now, I know Citizen AM has music, so I probably should tread lightly here. I don't know what.
No.
What they, so, okay, I'm getting pedantic here. So
No, it's fascinating.
I'm glad you think so.
I agree with everything that you're saying. What I struggle with is how. How do we become more deliberative? Because you've got, even in the left wing, you've got blue MAGA as well. I mean, I call it red MAGA and blue MAGA.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And even on the left side, you can't have conversations because you'll get canceled if you say certain things.
And that's where I will point out to you my other book, Left Wing, Right Wing People in Power, because one of the appendices in that book talks about my concept of the fake left. There is a real left and a fake left. And I know that also sounds very pedantic, but I think this is a very serious and important issue for anyone that cares about fighting the right wing, because there is the fake left, which does not believe and is not working toward the greater circulation of power.
Right.
They are only interested in opposition. And it's a deliberate oppositional antagonism to the right wing. Now, that comes from an honest place. The right wing does need to be fought. Fascism needs to be fought. Corporate evil needs to be fought. I understand that. I appreciate that. But these are people who, they don't want to have conversations. They don't want to build consensus. They just want opposition for its own sake. And these are the people that are, not all of them are blue MAGA, and blue MAGA isn't all of them, but it's that type of thing. They don't want to hear anything other than, I hate them.
Right.
And what is that? That's just right-wing reactionism turned on its head, a mirror image, and like, send those people all off to an island, have them have their fight. Let's have the rest of it for us. Because when you have that going on, which again, that's what the corporations and the social media, the Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks are, yes, put them in the box and make them fight with each other. And then the real people who want to have something else, they don't want to get involved because they don't see a place for that. And they keep creating new social media networks. You know, there's Blue Sky and Threads now, and can't think of the other one now, that Spoutable. And it's like, oh, we're going to have an open space where we converse, and it just descends into the same nonsense of, well, I don't know you, I think you're stupid stuff, because part of that is human nature. But there is no easy answer to the how. You ask the right question, but there's no good easy answer to that, because the fact is that the how is every person needs to make their choice to incline their minds and their actions toward that direction. And that does mean that you're going to have a lot of people that aren't going to play with you. They're not going to play that game with you. They're playing their own game. But we need to make these connections. We need to build these connections. And it's got to be one person at a time. That's the only way to change the world. And there have been a lot of people who have talked about this far more eloquently than I ever can. But again, their books and papers aren't being read, because, well, we can't monetize that. We can't put that on 60 Minutes. There's not enough conflict. It's too boring. No, Trump is an idiot. That's what sells. And Harris is, I don't know, what's the latest thing from Trump about Harris? I know she was stupid and has a weird laugh and stuff. I've been busy. Just beginning of the term, so I've been not as up on the. I think there's a debate tonight or something odd like that that's going to happen, and that's all they're going to talk about.
Yes,
the news.
Definitely a debate tonight between Harris and Trump, and it's got to be better than the last debate.
Yeah, I did not watch that, but I've seen some of the outtakes, and it's like, oh, Joe, poor Joe. But yeah, I didn't vote for Biden. I didn't vote for Trump either, but because I don't like a lot of Biden's policies. I really don't like his policies on Ukraine and Gaza, of course.
Yeah.
But No one deserved that. That was sad. That was really sad to see, because I think he's a decent guy. And you can disagree with his policies and say, okay, he's a good guy. He's trying, he's doing what he thinks is right, even though it's wrong. But yeah, that was sad. But and I was just so terrified that they're not going to do it, are they? They're not going to do it. They're not going to pull the trigger. And they did. I was like, there's hope. Harris may not be perfect, but at least there's some hope now.
Yeah.
That we can stop the madness.
But she keeps pivoting more to the right. She comes out with an economically, well, I'll call it economic populism to start with, and then she's starting to retract that now, in this rush to this so-called center, which is really used to be the right. And I wonder how much that's affecting her in the polling.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and I'm not good at electoral analysis in that sense. But I do remember when Harris launched her campaign in 2019, and people were saying, "Oh, have you heard about this Kamala Harris? She's a senator from California. She's a progressive." And I looked at like, no, she's not. And the one thing that she said in that interview was ABC that she did the interview with Walls.
Yes.
And she said, my values have not changed. And I think that's true. I think that she is a left-leaning centrist. And I think that she is right of center on certain policies. I think that she's left of center on good things like women's rights, is particularly on the abortion rights issue. So we'll take that. But I think she's kind of always been that. This whole thing of, she said 3 or 4 things in 2019 at a couple of campaign events. And that's been, oh, and she was radical left and now she's running to the center. I think she's kind of always been there. And I could be wrong about this because I haven't followed electoral politics that closely for a number of years. The whole Bernie thing, kind of disappointed me. But
me too.
I think that she's probably. I think that she's a damn sight better than Trump, and anything, pretty much anything other than Project 2025 is better. But I don't think Harris is she's certainly not this radical left person that Trump wants to portray her as. She's always been a centrist with some left leans. And I don't know about polling. The polls, I don't know what to make of those, especially now. Maybe they made more sense back in the day, when we were growing up, and when you phone people on the landline and you talk to people in that way. But I don't know if they mean anything anymore, really. But what's hurting her in the polls, even if there is being hurt in the polls, it's just probably people just don't really care yet. It's like, oh, there's something new. Well, that's kind of cool. Okay, I like her. And like, oh, back to my life now for a couple of weeks, and we'll reconvene in the first week in November. Maybe.
Do you? What is your sense as far as the election? Do you sense a Trump victory, or are you confident that we're going to avoid that?
My poor sense of it is that I think that the country will coalesce around Harris and Walz. And I think for 2 reasons. One is I do think that when it comes right down to it, people just don't want to go back to Trump. And I think if I was advising Harris and Walz in their strategy, I would say one of the things that you really need to keep hitting on is going back to Trump, and the whole thing about going backwards, which is what America will really do, going back to turning this clock back to the 19th century, really, literally. And that's part of it. I think the other part of it, too, is that once we get past the initial hubbub and hype, they will look at Harris and Walz, and they will see people they can relate to far more than they can relate to Trump and Vance. I don't know how anyone can relate to Vance.
Oh, I know.
It's just, wow. It's almost a caricature. Like you couldn't invent a fictional villain like this, and yet there he is. And I do kind of get the sense that as much as I say these channels should do more than mock Trump, the reality is he does seem to be falling apart. There does seem to be some very real decline going on. And he's trending in a direction where he's probably not going to hold it together for, what have we got, another 60 days until the election? Somewhere around that?
Tomorrow, yeah.
That seems like a big task because he is old and he does seem to be really rattled by the state of play. And goodness knows he hasn't said an original thing in several years. So the playbook is getting tired and old. I don't think it's as bad as some people, some anti-Trump people want to make it out to be, that you see these people saying, oh, there was a Trump rally and about half the people left halfway through. That's probably not true. But I do think he's turning some people off. And I think this will continue in that way. And there's a lot of wishful thinking on my part, of course, too, because I don't know what the future holds. The future of a second Trump presidency is too horrible to contemplate.
In that respect, is Trump an existential threat in himself, or do we go back to just saying, well, no, he's just a symptom?
I will always go back to he's just a symptom, because while I reject the idea that Trump is an idiot, I reject the idea that Trump is just a front, I will definitely say that if he is elected again, he's not in power. They'll indulge him. And I'm not saying there's some sort of shadowy body behind them. There's no deep state. That's one of the big lies. There's deep state. There isn't. But there are corporations, and there are think tanks that are funded by those corporations. And these are the people who create Project 2025, which is the culmination of a 50-year process of groups, think tanks like the Heritage Foundation. This has been their game plan since 1973. And Trump is the useful idiot because they can indulge him in his fantasies of needing power and affirmation, who can then in turn give that fantasy of power and affirmation to the MAGA supporters. And it's not some sort of great deep conspiracy. It's just how power works.
Right.
We should never forget that Hitler's party was democratically elected. Yes, they used voter intimidation, they used violence, but they gained power legally with dirty tactics, but legally. And once in power, they then did what they did. But they were supported by a large number of people in the German population. So that's a part of it. And again, it's not a conspiracy. It's just how power works. If Hitler didn't have the backing of certain powerful forces in the German hierarchy, he wouldn't have been able to get there. And that's the same with Trump. And maybe it's the same with Harris. Who knows? Does she have enough real support? Or, who knows? But I think the thing is that Trump is not the existential threat. And even the Project 2025 may not be the existential threat to the United States. but it is a very severe threat to the freedom of a very large number of people
Right.
in the United States. And I can tell you, sitting here in Europe, Central Europe, that everyone here has been very deeply concerned by the right-wing trend in the United States for a very long time. I was teaching at a university in England, and this was way, way back in 2015. It was October of 2015. And I was teaching a class in American government to British students. And you do this is what we're going to talk about, this is what the syllabus is, this is this and that. Anyone have any questions? First question, both sections. So two different groups of students. First question, both in one. Do you really think Trump could win? And this was even before the primaries. And these are British students. Their biggest concern about American government is, could Trump win the nomination and win the presidency? And I said, sure he can, because this is the United States. Of course it's possible. And I was sadly correct. But the whole world they're either wanting Trump to happen or scared that Trump will happen again because of what it means. But no, I think it's so important that we realize that it's not Trump. You know, if he gets into office somehow, he'll rant and rail, and people will let him do some of the things that he wants to do. But no, Project 2025, that's the agenda. And Walls is right. He's nailed it. You don't draw up a playbook unless you intend to use it.
Right.
And they do. And the things that have changed so much in the political landscape is that somehow now those corporate forces have amassed enough power, changed the structures of power enough that they feel that now is the time that they can really prosecute this agenda. And it's not about the deep state. It's just about, people who have lots of money and power. They use that money and power. It's human nature. So that's the fear. That's the danger, that you will see unions disbanded. You will see abortion made illegal. You will see education completely uprooted. And we go back to the pre-Deweyan model of just rote memorization of pre-approved facts and basic mathematics. Just create enough factory workers and worker drones. And America will be great again, right? Because everything is simple and we don't have this horrible diversity, and I don't have to see gays on my TV and blacks in my Disney movies, and everything's fine. And I'm becoming a parody of the whole thing, but that's the fright. That's the fright. Turner Diaries plus Brave New World.
But in that sense, though, would anybody but I warn people often that same thing, that Trump is a symptom, not the problem. The problem is far deeper rooted.
Mm-hmm.
And the argument I get back is always, yeah, but once Trump is gone, that movement dissipates. There'll be another version of Trump, will there not?
Oh, yeah. And what I'm really afraid of is that next version will be worse.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question it will be worse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
because their response will be, oh, Trump wasn't right-wing enough. Trump wasn't hate-mongering enough. We need to step it up more. Now, maybe it's the case, and I've heard this argument, and I don't know what you might think about it, is that the demographics are changing to the degree that most of Trump's support demographically is from older people.
right.
And the problem with older people is they tend to die at greater rates than younger people. And more younger people tend to be more liberal in general. And more young people are now eligible to vote. And so I saw one statistic that said that the shift in that is almost like 2% nationally of the whole electorate, of 2% fewer Trump voters because of age and death, and 2% new possible non-Trump, anti-Trump people from young people. And maybe this is an evolution that could be harnessed of people who are more liberal-minded. And I would say that I see as a professor over the years a very limited demographic, of course, in students, because you're the ones going to university as opposed to ones who aren't. But I have yet to meet a single university student in years and years now who doesn't believe that feminism and gay rights and open borders and just all kinds of all these radical left ideas. They go, well, of course, climate change is real. Why aren't we doing more about it? Of course, I don't care that my friend is gay. I don't care if they're trans. I don't care if my friend is black. They are already there. So many of them, despite all of the propaganda, despite all the fear mongering. And maybe there is hope there. I really hope there is. I think it'd be wonderful if that is slowly changing, but we can't count on that. And I would really like to see, I think maybe once there's been this huge lull. I think there's my answer to your thing about do the polling change in this past week, allegedly about Harris losing some support. It's because of this lull before the debate. Basically, nothing has happened in this last week or two because everyone's been preparing for this damn debate. And maybe when the debate is finally over and Harris doesn't make a complete fool of herself, please, then we can get back to actual campaigning and talking about issues again. But the spectacle will be over and we can move on, because she hasn't been really reaching out as much as she was originally to the young people. But the money is there. Goodness gracious.
Oh,
the
yeah.
money she's raised is just astonishing. It's just this built up wall, the dam burst. Is like, finally we have hope after all these years that maybe we can make some change. And hopefully she will actually make some change. And she will start to reach out to these people. There were signs of that. Maybe we're seeing a lull, maybe we're seeing a pause, and we can resume in that direction. But what we really need to do is not just campaign for Harris or anybody else. What we really need to do as people is talk more to each other, work more with each other, start changing the conversation, and support people who are willing to talk about things. People like you. I'm not sucking up to you, but yes, people who are willing to talk about these things. We have to start building that community, building that counterculture to the corporate domination of things.
Yeah, and I want to just go ahead and take this opportunity to talk about your book, promote your book here.
Please.
Why Trump? Why some people support him? How the rest of us can respond. Dr. Douglas Giles. Look, folks, it's a very short book, relatively speaking. Very informative, and if you want to understand how we got to where we got to in this point in history, if you want to understand Trump and the movement and find tools, some of which we talked about today, to combat this, to understand it, to respond to it, this is the book that you need to read. Why Trump? Why some people support him? How the rest of us can respond. It's available in all major platforms. I got it on Apple Books, and the audio version of the book is fantastic.
Thank you.
Just want to point that out. So please get the book. It's really informative. It's a very pleasant read. Lots of information, but very much understandable. And I want to thank you, Dr. Giles, for coming on the program. It was a great honor to have you, and it was a great honor to read your book, too.
You're very kind, and I thank you very much.
Where can people?
I really enjoyed this. This has been a great conversation.
Where can people find you?
Online, yes. dgilesauthor.com is my main author website. But if you put my name into the basic search engines, you'll be able to find a lot of my products out there and a lot of my online presence out there. But yeah, dgilesauthor.com. And you can then link to all I do videos, I do podcasts, I have books, I have articles in various places on the internet. And I'm always open for dialogue. I'm not just a professor that just pontificates and says, this is what I want you to think. I love dialogue with people. I love answering questions for people and helping them to learn about all these ideas, because our history is very important.
Yes.
We really need to understand what has happened, how we are the way that we are, how we got here.
Well, thank you so much for all that you do. And again, thank you for coming on the program. This has been a lot of fun. And for everybody else out there, we will see you next week. This has been Coup Save America.